Okay, so that's my link. I think the question is, oh yeah, okay.
Oh, there it goes. Beautiful. Brittany, if you could, or Brittany or James, if you could drop that link in the chat and
got it.
I did make it public, so it should be very findable.
Do it right.
So that's my
Brittany, can you do that?
Yes, it's
Okay.
dropped in the chat now.
Okay.
beautiful. Brittany, if you could, or Brittany or James, if you could drop that link in the chat.
Okay. Yeah.
So it should be very findable.
Mhm.
Right.
Brittany, did you drop that in the YouTube chat?
I'm so sorry. Yes, I did. Dropped in the chat now.
Okay. There's an echo going on.
If y'all
Yeah.
have the video open, you're gonna get
Yeah, if you can mute the
feedback.
video.
So you either have to mute the video, that you have it open on the tab.
Mhm.
Veronica, it's not letting us post. Can you drop the link in the original YouTube chat?
Oh, it might think that it's spam, so it might be deleting the comments. Yeah, Veronica, if you could put it in like the title or the description of the YouTube link. I think YouTube is deleting the posts.
Great.
Welcome to Artists in Conversation, Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, presented by the Windward Theater Area. My name is Jordan Fox, and I'm the Area Advisor of Theater here at Windward School. During these unprecedented times when we cannot gather and share stories in the same ways we have in the past, the faculty members of the theater area have decided to take this time to reflect on what inclusion means to our theater community and how we can learn more from others. Although this time keeps us apart physically, we wanted to find ways that we could actually become a stronger community based on openness, mutual respect, and understanding. Our intention is to invite a diverse group of professional theater artists to connect closely to our students and then to our larger community, and to discuss what it really means to actively acknowledge and interrogate racism, discriminatory practices, and inequity in theater arts. With a shared commitment to learn more, actively listen, and lean into discomfort, we want to use this format as a place of learning, reflection, and in the spring, creation of new works by our students inspired by this exposure. We believe that at its very best, theater has the power to change lives. We hope to put that belief into practice through these panel discussions. We are just beginning the work, and this work will continue far into the future. We are committed to our own education as well as the growth of our students. On behalf of my colleagues, we want to express our heartfelt gratitude to our community of faculty and administration for their support and encouragement for us to pursue this journey. We are so grateful for the generosity and passion of our esteemed panelists. We would also like to say thank you to our students for their openness and willingness to lean in and learn. And without further ado, please enjoy Windward School's Artists in Conversation.
Veronica, I can't hear you.
Hello, friends. Let's try this one more time. Thank you for bearing with us through technical difficulties. It would not be Friday the 13th without at least a couple of them, right, friends? So welcome to this month's Artists in Conversation panel, Playwriting and Crafting an Inclusive Narrative. This week, our students were given the unique opportunity to find their voices through workshops led by our esteemed panelists. We explored how to use music and storytelling, how to speak in our authentic voices, and how our family history and culture influence how we see the world. Today, we have the amazing opportunity to talk to a fascinating collective of talented artists and artist activists. It is my honor to introduce Anna Bernal, a gender nonconforming artist whose nonprofit organization, Q Youth Foundation, has given LGBTQIA+ youth an opportunity to create work centered around their identities as a way to find their place in the world. They are an inductee to the Honor 41 list of LGBT Latinx role models and a recipient of the LGBT Hero Award for the Eastside Queer Stories Festival. Currently, they're a professor at the Humboldt State University, teaching critical race and gender studies, community activism, and theater of the oppressed. Dionna Michelle Daniel is an emerging playwright, actress, and vocalist. Her most notable work, The Gunshot Medley, Part 1, was recently published in Routledge Contemporary Plays by Women of Color. She is a member of the prestigious writing groups, the Center Theater Group's Writers Workshop and the Skylight Theater's Play Lab. Currently, she serves as an artistic associate at the Pasadena Playhouse. Jennifer Maisel is a playwright and screenwriter. Her works have garnered many notable accolades, including the Kilroy List, the Stanley Award, the Windward Newman Award, the Penn West Literary Finalist, and a Showtime Tony Cox Screenwriting Award. Her latest work, 8 Nights, was an LA Times Critics' Choice, as well as an Ovation recommended piece. Rosa Navarrete is a Peruvian immigrant and storyteller raised in Los Angeles. She is published in Label Me Latino, and has performed her poetry and essays in places like Teatro Luna West, Fresno Lit Hop, and with Project La Femme. This year, Rosa's short bilingual play, Chabuca, Susana, Mami, and Me, was staged at Casa 0101 Theater to the Chicanas, Cholas y Chisme Playwriting Festival. Rosa was part of the inaugural cohort for the Black, Indigenous, People of Color Sci-Fi Screenwriting Lab over the summer. Thank you all so much for joining us. We're so lucky to have you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So since this is all about storytelling and using our authentic voices, I'd love to have you all take a minute and kind of just describe yourself and who you are and your journey to being in this point in time. Dionna, if you'd like to start us off.
Yeah, I'm Dionna Michelle Daniel. Where do we begin? Well, my first love was music, actually. And when I was 6, I wanted to be Alicia Keys. Like, I had the braids. I had my parents give me piano lessons. And then it became actually them trying to make me keep doing it because they put so much money into it. So I did that for about 6 years. And so I always knew that I was an artist as a kid. And I grew up in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, which is a kind of, a bubble of more liberal, progressive thinking in North Carolina. But yeah, it was still weird to grow up in the South as a Black woman. And I found my way to Cal Arts somehow, and through Cal Arts, as an actor, actually at Cal Arts, I found my way into being a playwright. And in some ways, I had always been writing before, doing poetry, but the playwriting, I kind of stumbled into it because while I was at school, I didn't really connect with some of the plays that were being put on at Cal Arts. A lot of the shows were super experimental, and I didn't see myself reflected back in some of the shows. So I wrote my own, and that kind of pushed me into my journey as a playwright.
Wonderful. Anna, would you like to tell us a bit about your story?
Yeah. Wow. Thank you so much for sharing your story, Dionna. It kind of parallels where I started too. I mean, I grew up in East LA. I now identify as a non-conforming, my gender identity and stuff like that. So I really didn't have spaces in East LA to connect as a young teen or anything like that as a young person. But I did play music. I learned how to play cello in 7th grade, and I thank my music teacher for encouraging me to, continue that craft. And then I ended up auditioning in West LA, ended up at Hamilton Academy of Music. So the arts was always kind of like, I would travel from East LA on a school bus to go play cello and then be in these orchestras and learn how to do all that. But then, I left LA as a teen also. We went to Arizona and I had a whole different life there. But on the way back, as I went to college and just did that life thing, I ended up in the nonprofit world, right? And with playwriting, it was also an accident. I stumbled into into it at Casa 0101 when I went to, I was at a coffee shop and I was like, hey, you should check out this theater. And I'm like, oh, okay, I'll go check it out. And then it just kind of sparked the idea with, they said, why don't you come and check out this workshop? And I'm like, okay, I'll just come in and observe. And then before I knew it, I was sitting in a group writing up my very first play. And I had no clue what to do. I was like, okay, I know I'm a storyteller. I can tell a story, right? And so that journey led me one way. And then my nonprofit world led me another with getting my master's degree at Antioch University, and kind of creating a space and a brave and bold space for the LGBTQ community on the East Side. And my intention was to really be able to document and make sure that our stories are being told authentically. And that's what I talked about with the students yesterday, is how do you tell your authentic, story yourself, right? And so now that I'm in Northern California, and the work is still continuing on in Los Angeles with a playwriting lab, with a short film lab that we're launching pretty soon, and poetry writing workshops that we just published a book for, an anthology. So I'm still building community, even though I'm far away, right? And the community itself is growing organically. So I feel like I'm more like a organic, I'm not gonna say I'm a mushroom, but I grow organically with, with my community, So I think that's where, that's where I'm at right now, just kind of making sure that our stories are being told and that we still are connected to ourselves.
That's wonderful. What accidental careers, somehow we get led down a path sometimes and we don't always understand that path, but hey, it's turned out for the best so far, I guess, huh? Thank you, Anna. Jen, would you like to share your story with us?
Hi, I'm Jennifer Maisel, not Marvelous Mrs. Mazel or however they say it. But not dissimilarly, I think it all kind of grounds into kind of how you're feeling as a small child. And I was a terrible musician, truthfully. I was forced into the piano lessons, and there was no good reason for that at all. But I always I was a really, really big reader, and I thought of myself very often in the third person, which was kind of like how I narrated my life in my head. And I was sure I would grow up to be a writer, and I was sure I would write books. And I have not written a book. And when I was very involved in theater in high school, and when I got to college, a friend freshman year said, let's take this playwriting class. And I said, but you need permission. She said, let's go ask permission. And I was like, it had not occurred to me like that, you could do that somehow. And that teacher ended up being my mentor for 4 years. And my senior year of college, they had a playwriting competition, and you entered blind, and I entered 2 plays and I won first and second prize. And that was like, oh, I'm decent at this. Like, it's something I can do. And I moved to New York, and I actually worked for some Broadway producers. I worked on Carrie, which was the biggest bomb ever on Broadway, which opened and closed like immediately. And I worked also for Cameron Mackintosh's company, who did Les Mis and Phantom and that. And then I got into grad school at NYU, and I just kept going, even though when somebody would say, what are you doing? And I'd say, I'm a playwright. And I almost had a question mark after that for the longest time. And people like, that's something you can do? And I'm like, I guess so, because it's what's happening. And I ended up moving out to LA, and I also do some film and television work so that, we can eat, because you can't eat from theater. And I just was having this conversation with people the other day that it is like, it's my church, it's my temple, a theater. And that's where my soul just lies. And I may not be, I grew up Jewish, suburban Long Island, every house on the block looked the same. And that's certainly in me culturally, but I'm not necessarily observant, even though I do, not all of my work has Jewish people in it, but a good portion of it does. And so my identity kind of gets tied into what, yes, like the legacy of Judaism and kind of and the memory that we have kind of in us, especially in the last play that I wrote, that I had produced here called 8 Nights, but also very much very female centered. And sometimes it's just about the thing that I find the passion for. I have a play that's about a woman who's a project scientist on the Mars rover expedition, and I knew nothing about science except that I thought that the fact that the people who worked on the Mars rover expedition lived on Mars time, which is a different kind of day than Earth time, was wildly theatrical. And then I spent literally 12 years writing this play, trying to understand the science. So sometimes it's just about what the thing is that catches me that I delve into.
That's fantastic. Again, accidents, happy accidents, all the happy accidents lead to great
Theater is all happy accidents. I think.
Yeah, that's all theater is a bunch of happy accidents that turn into something beautiful at the end. So Rosa, you have a very fascinating personal tale onto how you became a playwright. Would you mind sharing that with us?
I do not mind. Thank you again for having me, Veronica and Windward. And then also, I know everyone is having some technical issues, but everyone, the panelists here were backstage having a really good time getting to know each other. So hopefully you had a good time on your own time too. So about myself, it's a journey. So I, as some of the students already know, I immigrated here. I was undocumented as a child. Across the border. And so a lot of my writing and creativity stems from survival, I would say. Having to be a storyteller, having teachers say, "Where do you live?" And me being like, "Orion, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5." Like, because we can't say those things because it could be dangerous. And so I grew up as a storyteller, as a survival, and then it became this creative outlet for myself. The arts kind of was also a liberation for me. I too played instruments. I have things in common with the panelists here. I played the flute. I had no idea that I was good at music. I had no idea that I was good at the arts. I just did the things because I was like, oh, someone's inviting me here, I'm gonna do it. And so I just continued in that trajectory. And then eventually in high school, my family had to self-deport to fix our papers. I came back in 10th grade in a new school, had to become this like immigrant again. I was dressed different, I looked different. I had like these little beach beads from Peru and everybody was wearing Adidas and, you know, not to age myself, but back in those days you were wearing Adidas and FUBU and I was not. So it was like this reemergence again. And I am an addict when it comes to life experiences. And I just talked to somebody about this. It's a flaw and also a good thing for writers. I sometimes stay in really weird, strange, sometimes even bad relationships just to see what happens because I'm so curious. And I have this hunger to know, like, how far is this gonna go? Like, how does my body feel right now that I'm having this dramatic moment with my friend who's not really my friend, but she's kind of funny, so I wanna keep hanging out with her. So stuff like that, you're laughing because you relate. And that, you know, but that feeds my creativity. So I'm learning to let that go because now I think I have enough. I fill my quota on those relationships already. I'm good. But in high school, I got introduced to inner city filmmakers, a nonprofit film school, and then did that trajectory with Fred Heinrich, Stefania Lipner, and through them was able to work at Univision, DreamWorks, Disney. So I had production experience. Fun shows like Control and Caliente, which are like similar to TRL and MTV shows, but for Latinx communities. So I was a little PA in the background, like organizing people, telling them to smile. And it was at DreamWorks with Nina Jacobson, my boss then. I was like a development intern, and development different from the arts. It was more about writing and reading scripts and doing synopsis, that I realized at that time, it was around 2008, I didn't really have a space as a Latina in the industry. Like I felt, and maybe it was a self-sabotage thing, who knows, that I didn't have a space or a welcoming avenue or path. And also I only had a high school degree and, you know, umpteen amount of years of production experience. So I decided to transfer, and I went to UC Berkeley, and I minored in creative writing and dance performance and majored in English, because I was like, I'm gonna become a novelist now, because the industry, I don't know what that is. I don't know what they know who I am, so I'm gonna do this. And I was up in the Bay Area for 5 years, doing the writing, working for Dancers Group, another nonprofit, whom I love. Everybody should check it out. They do wonderful things for dancers and companies, dance companies in NorCal. And I had a friend who was a talent manager here in LA who was like, Rosa, you need to be in LA. You need to be writing for the screen. Why are you here? You have the experience with inner city filmmakers, etc. And I was just like, oh God. So it felt a lot for me like coming back to LA felt like with my tail between my legs, because I was trying to distance myself from the industry, because I didn't really feel like there was, again, space, but also taking a breath and saying, you know what, it is what it is. You left it, you're coming back. So what is next? And I found myself at Casa 0101 Theater. I got referred to that space through La Peña Cultural Center in Berkeley, and met the teachers there and started doing playwriting class there, because I thought, if I'm gonna go back to writing, I think I'm gonna start with theater. I just wanna see what this is like. I hear it's very similar to sitcom, situation comedy, so let me do this. And then through that was Chicanas, Solas, and Chisme. I did it the same year that Ana Bernal did. And we both were these newbies in this space. And right there is when I realized, oh, I can write, produce, and direct. Oh, I know this world. It's just it's a different platform. But as you all know in this panel, playwriting and screenwriting it's very different, but also very liberating in that you get to break rules and boundaries and borders, need I say. Yeah.
Great, thank you. See, told you, very interesting. So what do you guys draw as an inspiration to write? Is there a common thread you find yourself being drawn to, or any subject matter that you kind of just keep repeating? I know you guys use your culture and your identities in your writing, but is there anything else that brings you inspiration?
I tend to write a lot of things that ask the question, is blood thicker than water? That's always one of my questions that runs through everything that I do. And when I get the inspiration, it could be from anything. Sometimes it's from a physical place. Sometimes it's from a newspaper article. The play about the Mars Rover expedition came from reading an article in the LA Times about how about that time difference, and I thinking it's wonderfully theatrical, and then kind of latching on to a JPL person that I met, and having her tell me all these things, and just kind of getting into that world. And another play I have about altruistic kidney donors who aren't so altruistic came from just getting fascinated with that. So I think it's kind of this weird opportunity when you're a writer that you get a chance to just go live in another world. You get to explore it historically, you get to explore it artistically, you get to kind of pretend you're someone you're not, to be part of that. And I think it goes back to my whole reading books and sitting in the corner all the time when I was a child, like that you just get to immerse yourself in another place until you're so familiar with it that when it comes out of you, it's really your own voice, but it's come through you. So that's where I kind of find mine, and that's kind of the themes that go through mine.
It's awesome.
Yeah,
Do you-
I think. Oh, yeah, I was gonna say.
I was just about to call on you, please.
Oh, okay. I think, in a broad sense, I say that my work deals with the Black experience in America. However, I'm realizing that a thread in a couple of the plays I've been writing and have written, the underlying theme is home. So for instance, like Gunshot, when I wrote that, it's very much dealing with what's the word? police brutality, as well as, just like these three key time frames in the Black experience, from slavery to, from slavery to the civil rights movement to the present day with the Black Lives Matter movement. But all of the like underlying things that the characters are talking about is just wanting to be home. And what love is too. I'm a hopeless romantic. So like all of like my plays have these big themes of like love. But again, I feel like the love, it gets flipped in Gunshot because it's really about this familial love. And the three characters in themselves have like, they're not related, but they've built this bond together because they were like slaves on this plantation together. And those bonds that become a love that is so unconditional. So I think unconditional love is one. I'm always trying to explore just like the parts of people that we don't see, so like who is that person you are when people aren't watching? Yeah.
Great. You had a really unique story about how you wrote or where you got inspiration for Gunshot Medley. Would you mind sharing that with us?
Yeah. So Gunshot Medley, it was such an interesting time. It was the summer of, oh God, was it 2015? I think it was 2015 when I first started the bubbling of just all of the stuff that was happening at the time. So Michael Brown's cop who shot him was acquitted that year, I believe. And then that summer, Charleston happened, and I was in North Carolina that summer. And actually all of my family lives in South Carolina. So Charleston had this other kind of feeling that just felt way too close to home. So it was like Charleston, it was Mike Brown, it was all these Confederate flags coming out of nowhere and people riding up and down the streets with Confederate flags. And so I just happened to be in the cemetery in my hometown with one of my mentors, and we were sitting in the cemetery, and I had noticed all these Confederate flags on the graves. And I was like, this is weird. So we go closer to look at it. And it was this whole memorial to Confederate soldiers who had died. And it had this big plaque that said, "Our Confederate Dead." And someone had went and put Confederate flags on the graves to honor them. And then my mentor was like, well, do you know the slave graves are just like over there? And I've been to this graveyard so many times. And so we like hopped over the bushes. There literally was like a stack of bushes. It was just like hidden. And there were three graves, Betty, Alvis, and George. And all it had was their death dates. So I don't know how old they were. I just know when they died. And those three characters, I wrote Gunshot Medley. And another thing too that I didn't mention during the class was that, as I was writing the play as well, I kept writing the wind, and there became this character of the wind. And then I had a friend who read it and they were like, this is Oya. Oya is in this play. And so I was like, oh yeah, she is in this play. And it was so crazy because there were so many things. Like Oya is, she rules the gates to the cemetery. She's the mother of 9. There were 9 people who died in Charleston. There were just so many. And she's also the bringer of transformational change. And these characters, they all kind of have this moment in the play where they have to decide, am I going to keep living the way I am? Or am I going to like drop this thing that I've been doing in purgatory for years and like try to make a change in this world? So yeah, it's like life, I feel, is a big contributor to my work, and just like the storm that is the world at the time that the play is being written. And then I think there's also a spiritual part to it too, where you just kind of like tap into like listening and becoming a vessel. And for me, at times, I feel like Oya used me as a vessel for that play.
Thank you for sharing that. So a common thread I've noticed between a lot of your works has been generational trauma. And it's kind of something I know it is a difficult topic, but do you feel, any of you feel like dealing with that subject in your work is transformative? Do you think it's a way of healing? What are your thoughts on using that as a through line for your shows? Rosa, you're making my favorite face. I know you've got something to say.
It's hard. It's when you really go there. It has stopped me from writing. It has made me step away. It has made me, but then like constantly reminding yourself that it's not yours also, even though it might be your story and or inspired by something that you went through. If it's coming to you very much like Dionna said, is then something right in the ether, like you are the vessel of the story. So something is trying to speak through you and have you express it. So the play that you all mentioned at the intro, Chabuca, Susana, Mami, and Me, is very, very personal. And it's about me and my grandmother and how I was trying to be there for my mom physically because my mom was undocumented. So I had to be there, represent her. And even though I was like 19, I had to walk into the space like I was the eldest of the house somehow and distribute things the way my mom wanted it to be distributed. And meanwhile, my mom's in LA trying to be this independent woman, and it's hard for an undocumented mujer to do that. So the story is about this trifecta, this like the elder, the granddaughter, the mother, and then what connects them, and then also what's in the way of their connection. And that was really difficult. My director for Chabuca was Elvia Susana Rubalcaba. And holy moly, like I handed over my play, and then she brought notes and ideas, and I was just like bawling, and I'm like, okay, well, you read all the subtext, right? And now I have to like watch this play with my family and, you know, essentially be destroyed, but in a good way. But the good thing about the thing that happened was like after the opening was I was walking down the stairs and another board member stopped me. They said, Rosa, thank you for writing this. And I was like, you know, you're in your head a lot when you're creating and you're like, yeah, sure, lady, like whatever. But I had to take a pause and listen, really listen. And then remind myself that it's not my immigrant experience, even though as specific as it might be in my writing, is not alone. And there's other people leaning on it when they hear it, when they experience it. And there's other people who want to cry through it and who might resonate somehow with it. So I'm growing from comedic writing. I feel like I've hidden a lot of my internal struggles through comedy. And this is one of the first pieces that I've written that's very vulnerable for me. So that's been an interesting experience for me to observe too about my trajectory as a writer, is like, what is letting go? What is personal, but what is also letting go of that process? And it means letting go of some things that are not necessarily serving me anymore, also as a human being. So it's very transformative. And I only hope that it helps people. And I know that healing is multi-leveled. You know, you experience a play, you can also seek assistance, you can go to therapy, you can meditate and do yoga and all the different things. But I do feel like that it's important, and that to see yourself represented is essential. Mm-hmm. It validates your existence in this world.
Mm-hmm. Jen, you actually had an interesting experience when you were doing your play 8 nights with a largely Latinx community watching it. You want to tell us about that experience and kind of how it bridged the different cultures?
Yeah, so 8 Nights is a play about a German Jewish refugee who comes here in the 1940s, and it's 8 nights of her life over 8 nights of Hanukkah over 8 decades, and it touches upon trauma experienced also in the Japanese American internment camps and the African American experience and the LGBTQ plus experience. And when I wrote it, it was in the legacy of this time 4 years ago, where, you know, right after the election, I had been thinking for a long time about writing a Hanukkah play, because I just thought it'd be cool to write a play that was like 8 scenes and 8 nights, and thought, okay, there hasn't been one that I knew of. But I was so traumatized by the election that I couldn't write for the longest time, and I'm sure everybody else probably felt the same way. But in January, someone started tweeting about the St. Louis, and I don't know if you know about the St. Louis, but it was the ship that was allowed to leave Germany with Jewish refugees on it, told they were going to be able to take refuge in Cuba and then come to the United States. And when they got to Cuba, they were turned away. The United States turned them away. Canada turned them away. And they ultimately ended up back in Germany. And of the 900 people on the ship, the St. Louis, about 300 of them died in the camps because they weren't saved. And this is when, you know, you can find out that Roosevelt was a big anti-Semite. And so at that time, I was reading about the St. Louis because I hadn't known anything about it. And those articles in the New York Times from like the late 30s were like the same as what we were reading right then about the Syrian refugee experience. And so the day after Trump took office, which was the day of the Muslim ban, I started writing the play, and I wrote the first draft in a month. And the first reading was at Cypress College, or one of the first readings was at Cypress College in Orange County, which they do a new play festival every summer. It's directed by students. It's all students in it. And the playwright shows up a couple of times along the way in the beginning and for the reading. And it's a largely Latinx community that's at that school. And in the cast, I think maybe one person was half Jewish. Like there was not a lot of connection in that way. But the experience afterwards was incredible because all of these kids were expressing that they were feeling, and they're a little worried about, like, this is a 20-ish year old audience. Are they going to relate to this at all? And they were saying, this is us. Like, this is us coming, you know, having come here on our own and projecting forward into our future. And that, you know, this, and then we had a production of it last fall here in Glendale, and the audiences ranged, and it was fascinating because we did have people who were Holocaust survivors who came, or people who were children of Holocaust survivors. And because the play generationally, there's 2 actresses playing this one character, one from like 19 to late to 40s, and then one from 40s to 86. And then the original actress plays her daughter and then her own granddaughter. So you're seeing the generations go through, and just everybody seemed to find a way that it touched their life, even if it wasn't exactly their life. And it's interesting. There's a theater, there's something called the Jewish Plays Project in New York, and I'm friendly with the artistic director, and I sent it to him. He said, "Oh, I love this, but we can't do it because we don't do Holocaust plays." And I said, "It's not a Holocaust play, it's a refugee play." And he's like, "It's a Holocaust play." And then about a year later, he came back to me and goes, "It's a refugee play." So, you know, it's sometimes I understand why he didn't want to do it. And I understand that they want to get Jewish theater away from being Holocaust centered, but he wasn't looking at the fact that it was about legacy and it wasn't about the trauma in the moment. But yeah, it's always such a heartening and emotional experience when someone comes to you and tells them how something that you've created relates to their world. And especially when it's maybe not a world that you're a part of. And it's just so fortunate to be part of that.
Thank you. On that note, with the election of Kamala Harris as our vice president-elect, females, Black women, and South Asian women are now seeing and experiencing the representation at the highest levels of our government. There will be so many pieces created about this moment. As playwrights, what does this representation mean to you? Anna, you're making a face.
I can turn in, yeah.
Please, butt it. I'd love it. We'd love your opinion.
Here, everybody. No, I think it's a very important historical time, and the stories that will come out in the future is really something that it's just gonna stamp what has happened and what can happen, right? To start breaking the patriarchy, to start questioning all the things that were norms. They're no longer norms, right? That we get to move forward as gender nonconforming persons or women of color in these positions of power. That we can make a difference, and we can get in there and represent the people that we're supposed to be representing, right? And also, maybe it's a time for change, and like what we've all talked about is transformation, right? And any level of like from the immigrant experience to the Black experience to the LGBTQIA experience, all these experiences, combined, and all these intersectionalities, meaning all the things that makes us unique, is going to really transform what we become to the rest of the world. And I feel like we all are going to experience some awakening, not just in the United States, but an awakening across the entire globe, because it's like an ecosystem, right? We're all connected in some way or another. And whether it's electronically or environmentally, just so many connections out there. And so with this change that's happening and this mobilization that's happening, I think there's going to be more places for us to grow and change. But with that, you also have to think about, the things that are going to take a long time to break and and that's where that trauma, that intergenerational stuff comes through, the epigenetics of us, of us in our blood, in our systems, like things that we still carry off. And for the people that will continue their genes and everything like that, I'm just gonna have a puppy, so I'm cool. Like I'm good. I don't have to leave anything else behind. But I know that even if I hope that the people that I do interact with, right, that my story or a piece of my story will continue on, right? How we tell our stories. So maybe Q Youth Foundation for me is the baby, a different baby, a different type of birth. So yeah, I think it's a really important moment in time for people. Yeah, that's me. 2 cents.
Thank you.
Yeah, I was gonna add, it's so hard because it's this kind of like double-edged sword in a weird way. And the reason I say that, it's like, like when Kamala gave her speech, like I was more tuned into her speech than, like Joe Biden's speech. Like I just wanted to know what she was going to say, being the first woman vice president. Like that's big and it's so beautiful. And in ways, because she's in this office, there is an acknowledgement, that like we can get there. But on the other hand, it's like the double-edged sword is, I'm so scared we're going to fall back into kind of what happened with Obama, right? So it's like once Obama became in office, we were like, we're in a post-racial society. And now that the president is Black, like racism is over. And, Trayvon Martin happened during the time that Obama was in office. And it's like, so that shows you that no, nothing has been fixed. And in some ways, things have gotten worse only because we're seeing it more because of our phones and social media, and it's just out there. And, there's also Kamala's history as well, which is not necessarily like you can have both. And I think it's like to acknowledge the importance of this moment and to acknowledge there's so much more work to do. Is where I'm at. And I want to encourage people that like, we haven't stopped yet. Like, let's keep climbing and let's like shatter, that like glass ceiling that even like Hillary Clinton would talk about. So.
Yeah, even with the way the election went, there still is a lot of work to do. There's still a lot of support for, ideas that we thought were gone, and then they're back again, and it just kind of reared its ugly little head back at us. So yeah, I completely agree. There's a ton of work to do. You actually said a really interesting thing about I had read that you had said theater that is rooted in social activism has always been a passion of yours. You believe that art, especially live performance, has the potential to dramatically change hearts and minds. Theater has the ability to plant the seeds of empathy, inquiry, and discussion. And from those seeds, real social change begins. And I think that's true of any art form. Art is in itself an activist work. It is not created in a vacuum. It is a way to express yourself and a way to change the things that you have found wrong. Being able to express stories and being able to finally express your authentic self. Anna actually shared a really great play with us, Praise the Silence, right? Yeah, and about someone trying to find their identity in the face of their mother's homophobia, being able to come out to their family and being hidden, half of them being hidden just away in the back of their brain, trying to come to terms with the fact that even the people we love very, very deeply also have very deep set ways that we might not be able to change, but we will be able to find a community in our arts and in our found families, and in being able to use those families to find our place in the world is a really important thing for us all to be able to find. Do you feel like your work kind of gives a sense of possibility or a sense of home to marginalized voices? Any of you? I know Anna's does. Can you speak to more about what Q Youth does and what its mission is? Because I feel like that really fits in that finding your place in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. Q Youth really came out of a place where in East LA, when I was a teenager, okay, this was like over 100 years ago, like 20 something plus, I can't remember. When I was growing up, I knew there was something about me that I wasn't really sure what that difference was. And that's where my writing comes from being from the other. Like, why is it the other? Like, why do I feel this way? And so when I had mentioned earlier that I had moved to Arizona and I lived in Palm Springs. And then when I finally made my way back home to Los Angeles, because LA is my home and it will always be my home, there was still nothing available for the LGBTQIA community there. Yes, you can go to areas where in West Hollywood or West LA where there's spaces like that, but I couldn't find a place where I belonged in this, where I grew up. And so the idea was that, well, I need to get families talking to each other and their youth talking to each other. And, we'll have bilingual parents groups and things like that. And then I just kind of started one sleepless night thinking. And then I said, you know what, I think I need to create these storytelling events and start building community that way. So what we do really, what ended up happening was that, yes, the youth did not quite have a place, but also older community members didn't have a place either. And so I said, okay, let me see what I can do. I created a storytelling event at a local coffee shop in El Sereno, and called Holy Grounds. And I thank them all the time because they really gave us a shot. And the owner was a gay man who said, yeah, let's get it started. And that one day I was super nervous because that otherness, it always makes me like, well, what if we have some people that don't agree that there's gay and queer and LGBTQ people hanging out here? But, 13 people showed up, right? And after we had a conversation, we had networking, it was really an interesting experience. By the time that we kept doing these not workshops, but the storytelling events, the last one that I personally hosted, we had over 40 people show up, right? And they were telling their stories and sharing and building community and doing icebreakers and getting to know each other, that, yeah, there's a place for us in the East Side, which led me to think a little bit more on how to document these stories and how to build more community and be more aware. And so I think the importance of Q Youth, how it started, is really a grassroots kind of way to where it's going now, with now team members understanding the mission and vision of, well, let me take the purpose, because mission is rooted in colonialism. So the purpose of why we are existing, right? And I always tell the people that work with me, one day we may not need Q Youth anymore. We can dissolve it because we will have representation in media. We will be safe in our neighborhoods, that we will be able to walk and be safe and brave, right? We don't have to have these labels because it's always like identity politics and all that stuff. So I'm hoping that Q Youth dissolves one day. It's not like these 100-year-old nonprofit organizations that continue doing the work. Some of them, but maybe it'll become something else. Maybe it will grow to be, more advocacy for other things, So I hope that answered the question a little bit, because
It answered it absolutely beautifully. Thank you. Speaking of representation, is there a time in your life that you felt represented in a piece of media? Do you remember the first time you finally were able to look at a screen or a play and go, hey, they're like me? No. See, that's the part that saddens me a little bit.
I think no, but I think that's also what makes, in some ways, you an artist, because you're kind of constantly going in for the attack of that. Like, I think coming up, and I would venture the oldest one of us here. There was one Jewish female playwright, and that was Wendy Wasserstein. And if you weren't like Wendy Wasserstein, who's lovely and amazing, but like if you weren't writing like Wendy Wasserstein, where did you fit? And also, we already have one, so we don't need you. And I didn't see myself in that work, and I don't see myself in a lot of portrayals of Jewish New Yorkie people as much as I might enjoy them. But I also think what's kind of fascinating right now is what I'm seeing is this widening of what we want to see on a stage and what we want to relate to. And I've always been known for like casting diversely. And, I had to play with a Jewish couple and they were both played by Asian actors because that's what I wanted. And that's, and because those were the best actors who came in to audition for the play. But then I got flack for it. So I think it's hard to see yourself in the world, but I think what you see is like, oh, this is my medium. And this is the place. Like, this is the place where the magic is that I can come in and create. But I don't know that I've seen me ever.
Yeah, it's hard to think back on a specific moment. I do think being a child of the 90s and kind of not trying to grow up, but like having the illusion that I was growing up in a post-racial society, it was a little bit different. I think for me, it was more the moment where you realize, oh, wait, no, like, why is every Black person in a TV show the best friend? It was like things like that where you have that realization of like, wait, something's not right here. Everything that I've grown up with is just wrong. So I think the older I get, the more I really appreciate. And I think the older I get too, the more that I'm like, okay, I'm sorry, I'm not here for like the cis, white, straight, story. And it's funny because even though I'm cis and straight, the movie for me that like I went to the theater over and over and over to see just because I was so excited about it was Moonlight. Like when Moonlight came out, I was just like, I want to throw all of my money at this movie because it deserves it and it deserves to be seen. And this story is so important. And again, it's like in seeing this story being told, it made me feel like my story could be told too. So yeah.
I just had a flashback right now of being like a mini middle school girl and watching Selena. And I'm not
Yes.
Mexican American, but I was raised around a lot of my Chicano friends. So they would come to my door and they would knock and they're like, oh my God, everybody knew when Selena passed, everybody in my apartment building. And the article was cut up and it was passed around all the little kids in the neighborhood. But I remember seeing the film because when that happened, I didn't know. I was just this little Peruvian immigrant, like, who is this? Like, why is everybody crying? Like, I didn't know. And then I saw the film, and then the way it impacted me, and seeing such a positive figure, like a positive human being, and she's Latina, and she looks a little indigenous, and she's got long, dark hair, and she's fighting for her desires and her dreams, despite whatever stands in her way. That movie, I feel like, did change me a little bit. I didn't necessarily identify again like culturally, but I did identify as a Latina, and I identified as someone who was living in these two in-between worlds of like my family in Peru and my friends and family here in the States wanted me to assimilate and lose my accent and all that. So I always constantly found myself like, if this was this rainbow between these two places in my life, I'd be that little girl like with her feet dangling over the rainbow and just looking over and like, well, where do I go? Like, and which one, who's gonna take me this time? So I felt a little represented there for sure. And it's such a huge, I think, in media moment in history for a lot of Mexican American and Latinx communities. I don't want to speak for the whole world, but I know from at least the closeness of my friends who I know and who identify from different countries that are Latin American and Mexican American, when anyone mentions Selena, everybody knows the songs, everybody knows her story. She's so important. And, man, and what would have happened if her crossover would have continued and she would have done film and television, and beautiful things are happening in her honor now, thank God. But also like, man, where would we be if she would be here right now?
Yeah, I feel the same way about her. She could have accomplished so much and have done so much for our community. I am the daughter of Mexican immigrants, and being able to see that representation would have been wonderful. I was kind of stuck in between these worlds of, I'm not brown enough to be Mexican, and I'm definitely not full white, especially if you know me well enough, and being able to kind of sit in that weird divide of I'm not enough of anything to be a part of an identity. With Selena, especially with the way they're representing her now, they even kind of strip away some of her indigenous looks and her darker skin. She keeps being played by these lighter skin Latinx people. And being able to grow up and see someone that looked enough like people I knew and people I was related to may have made a difference in being able to embrace my identity. I know my mother was never able to, because when she moved here, her dad is American, and he went, "You're American, you speak English, you are not Mexican, you are not Guatemalan, you're not any of these things, you're an American." So she didn't grow up in the tradition, she didn't grow up in the language, and neither did my father, because his mother was just, I don't know, we live in Huntington Beach, we don't need to speak Spanish, my kids are never going to need to know how to speak Spanish. So he also grew up not having these traditions that I think I would have found comforting in my younger age, being kind of stuck in between these two worlds. And I think we need to take step forwards in representation in the way that we're representing different cultures in the media. I know that there are attempts, but they tend to be short-lived, or they tend to be overly criticized over, well, they're not brown enough to make this a show actually about the Latinx experience, or seeing the stereotypes in LGBTQIA-based centered shows, or even just giving them a normal storyline, not some tragic love story of being, of that they're only around for the best friend or the weird kid. And I think we have a lot of work to do. Is there anything you have seen recently that you think is doing the work or trying to do the work that we could shout out so that people can see that we like?
Yes. Sorry.
No,
Sorry.
no.
I was gonna say, although this is for there is a trigger warning with it, but definitely "I May Destroy You" by Michaela Cole. I would say that one. And although I have a lot of problems with this TV show, like sometimes I'm just like, what are you doing? But I think the concept of Lovecraft Country was really great and beautiful. And some of the things they did really, really well and amazing. So
I just say that book was written by a college friend of mine, and I'm so happy for him.
Oh, wow.
And it's definitely not representative of who he is. I can't think of anything at the moment. I think the thing that I've been very focused on of late is being an older writer and over 40, which is kind of like death to writers everywhere. And I've been connected with this group called Honor Roll, which is all about female identifying playwrights who are over 40. So I don't think any of you are over 40, but if you are, come join us. But it's women who got overlooked because of sexism as we were starting out, and now overlooked because of ageism, truthfully. And so what I've really enjoyed of late is just seeing more women of any age, women of any ethnicity over the age of 40, no longer the ingenue, but getting represented in like major series and plays. And even Kamala Harris, looking at her and going, she's in her 50s and she's just like a rock star. And so that to me is the place that I'm seeing some representation now, as I kind of click into, you only get better as an artist as you get older, but the opportunities just narrow for you. So it's great to see women who are grabbing on and making things happen for themselves and for other women.
I think it's like an imperfect experience. And also there's problems with the word Latinx for some communities. And, what are you, Hispanic or Latinx? I identify as Latinx. But one day at a time gives me hope. Gloria Calderon-Kellett's show. And I know it also got a lot of flack because it's hard, like who do you cast? Is it the right cast? And maybe my mind will change someday, but I'm right now like in this mindset of like, let's just support the content. Let's keep supporting, let's watch the shows, let's click on the stream so that the money talks for it. The money talks, in the industry, unfortunately. It could be a beautiful story, but producers will be on the phone, and I've been in that world, and they'll be like, well, we make our money back in the first weekend. And if the answer is no, then it won't get made. So we have to support each other. We have to continue watching Lovecraft and One Day at a Time. And as imperfect as these products might be for some of us, and we'll notice the errors when these things get canceled, when these products don't get supported, that essentially closes the door for other things to happen. And so my dream someday is that we won't need doors, is that we will have our own studios like, some people are doing right now in the world, and just producing it. Veronica, you and I talked about Desi Luarnes and Lucille Ball, who had to open their own studio and had to create their own legacy essentially. And then they made I Love Lucy. And it was like this biracial couple with their biracial child, and it was okay. Nobody questioned it. So I think that mindset for some reason needs to continue being nurtured and bloomed, because we're tired of waiting for things to be the right way. So if this is not feeling right, then write, then do the writing, do the work, and put your stuff out there, you know.
I agree with Rosa, like ditto Rosa. I mean, I believe it or not, my mom was a single mom from Baja California. We've been back and forth from my grandparents were born in California, but my mom was born in Mexico and Baja California. We've just been here a long time. And, you know, there's shows like Gentified, like Rosa had mentioned, not the most perfect writing, not, you know, the representation, but it's something that we can kind of watch, even with the queer community, with Vida that came out. Also there's those holes, those big gaps in there, but it's something that's out there. And for me, when I was growing up what I wanted to say is that I didn't know English, even though I was born here. I didn't learn how to speak English until I was going to kindergarten or maybe even third grade. And so I thought like, well, I went up to the neighbor's house to go get my sister because she was visiting her friend. And here I go up there super confident, you know, telling the neighbor like, hey, you know, I'm gonna say it in Spanish. ¿Está Marta aquí? He's like, ¿Está Marta en el cuarto? Like, and the dad was like, are you looking for Martha? I'm like, yeah, you know, I was like, and then I run back home and say, hey, Mom, I spoke English, but the entire time I was speaking Spanish. So, you know what I mean? Like, and then there's a moment in time in there where, you know, our identities, our heritage, our culture, you know, Latinx, Hispanic, Latino, wherever we come from, I mean, somewhere in between growing up, it's stripped away and we feel ashamed for being who we are when it's just a tragedy, you know, like, why don't we celebrate people who speak multiple languages in this country, right? Why don't we celebrate people, you know, you're processing so many different things, you know, so it doesn't make us, you know, not intelligent people. We have these things in us, right, that we can share and grow and really it's full of culture, you know, like you can embrace that and traditions and things like that. Not all of them are, you know, some of them are based in really strange things, but you know, we can say, like, I feel like as a Latinx person, you know, I put my little altar for my family, for my mom. She passed away from breast cancer now 22 years ago, you know, and I put my little picture up and my grandparents up, and I put my little candles and I bake my bread, my pan de muerto for them to honor them. And, you know, like, we need to kind of wake up in a sense that we're kind of in this together, and we have to really embrace each other, you know, and that's kind of like my thing, you know, when you say, Jennifer, when you say like, I'm 43, right? And then, but I always tell my students, like, you got to think of that 18-40-60 rule, right? At 18, you think everybody's watching you and listening to what you're all about. And at 40, you're like, I don't care what anybody says about me. I'm going to do my thing. And then at 60, you turn around and you're like, oh, nobody was really actually listening to me. Everybody was in their own world doing their own thing. So you have to let people know, like, you got to make the pathway and make the things happen. You know, QU Foundation wouldn't have happened in the East Side, right? If I didn't know that there was a gap or there was a need. So for TV representation, we have to, like Rosa said, and everybody had echoed, like, we need to create these spaces for ourselves, you know, for us to be represented.
I just wonder if we weren't seeing what was missing. If it wasn't missing, right, representation for what we need to see, if we would be creating, right? Because you've stepped into this place for LGBTQI youth, right? And because there wasn't something you saw that echoed who you were, and I just wonder. I think that's something that artists do, is that they feel other, they try to explain that other, they try to put it up there for other people to understand their other. And if we saw the perfect representation, maybe we just wouldn't feel there was a need for us to particularly create that. I don't know. And also, as we know, like, no creation is perfect.
I was gonna say that. It's always gonna be a work in progress. But I know that for my community, again, I'll speak for myself, but I my colleague Amber Alonso and I, we do this fundraiser called Artists for Acción, where we raise funds for children at the border. For us, Amber and myself, and I hope you're okay with me saying this, Amber, it is imperative to have our representation on the screen, imperfect or not, because we are so dehumanized, and not just us, right? There's the indigenous also community, obviously Black community and etc., people of color. But right now we're so dehumanized that we are allowing, in this moment in time right now as we're talking, that children remain in cages and that families are split apart. There's sterilization happening for some women. And that to me is the power of the arts. For me, it's life and death. It's not just what I want to create artistically. It's also like, there's life and death happening at the border, and I have to continue, because if I don't, our voices are going to disappear and nothing's going to matter. And then anything can happen to continue to happen to these communities. So I hope that we do have more representation. I hope we have more television shows, more plays that were in people's faces. I hope more of us move into these areas that don't know our communities so they can know us more.
Yeah.
I don't remember the city right now. I'm sorry, Dionna.
Oh, no, keep going.
There's a city, a fisherman city. God, where was it? I'll find out and I'll share it with you all later. But where it was fishermen and they had Latinx communities, but the huge deportation that happened removed a lot of these communities out of the city. And then when they were gone, the fisherman community were like, oh God, like, how are we gonna do the fishing and how are we gonna process the things? And they realized that the thing they had supported, this proposition about deporting, affected directly their income, their economy, their arts, and the friends of their children. And so then it like dawned on them like, oh, like the thing that on paper for me, it was like, yeah, get these, criminals out of my country, was actually taking away these beautiful human beings out of their community and affecting their economy, affecting, the education system, and et cetera. So go ahead, Dionna.
Oh no, I just wanted to add, because while you were talking, and the things you were saying was so beautiful, and it made me think about why I said, like, Lovecraft isn't perfect, right? And the reason I said that is actually because there's one episode in particular where I was watching it actually with my white roommates, and it just got weird. It got really, really weird. And mind you, Lovecraft the genre of it is horror. But there is a moment where a little spoiler, but I'm not going to spoil anything. It's just that they go back to the Tulsa riots. And so there are moments where you see that. And so I felt traumatized actually after I watched that episode. And so something in my work in particular that I've been thinking about is because I wrote Gunshot Medley and I said it was a part 1. And so many people were like, when is part 2 coming out? When is part 2? And initially I had this idea to do something with like the videos of Black people when they're getting shot. But then I was like, you know what? I don't want to hear those videos. I don't want to see those videos. I don't want to re-traumatize my audience. And so it's that thing too, like as an artist, how do you tell truthful, authentic stories, but also keep your audience, in mind that like, hey, I don't want to traumatize you, because at the beginning, it was good we had these videos. It was good we had the videos because not many people believed it was even happening. But then what starts happening to the psyche, especially the Black psyche, when that's all you see when you get on social media, it's like, then I feel like that spiritual damage is doing a little bit more. So it's this fine line, I feel, of battling like what is right. And then going back to like, I think about in the 90s too, or like early 2000s, there was so much about colorblind casting. And then now you think of colorblind casting and you're like, no, like what is that? Like, but at that time it served its purpose, and it was to get more people, more actors and different faces in roles. So I think I'm always for progress, and let's just keep striving for, yeah.
It actually relates to a really great question we got in the chat on YouTube. James wants to know, can you share ways with us to be an unproblematic ally to a culture that isn't our own, but we are drawn to viscerally or feel like I don't want to say, the colonizer way of saying is we want to help. And I don't want that to, there's issues with people not of color helping groups of color. And is there a way for us to be able to help further what needs to happen?
I know from my mentor, Amara Tabor Smith in Oakland, when we talked about it, because we did a show with some traumatic video once, Dionna, and it was intense, but also like it was needed at that time at Berkeley, at UC Berkeley, for that audience. But one of the videos we watched were the white allies. You have so much power. You can literally stop a policeman from shooting. I mean, obviously not necessarily through the Trump administration. That shifted a little bit, as we saw. Children were getting pepper sprayed, elders, veterans. But you have a lot of power. So a way to exercise your power is to be the shield for BIPOCs. And I remember we saw an image of these white women just locking arms and being at the front, not necessarily to like, we are here to protect. It was more like, no, we're here to make sure that you don't break this, because what's happening in there is important and you're not about to hit me. I know that. So yeah, I think finding organizations that are in existence that do the good work is a good first step, and then supporting them and asking them directly, like, what does your community garden need? What is, what do you need at the border? Do you want me to volunteer and drop off water jugs at the desert? There's an organization that does that, and the name escapes me again, I'm sorry. But doing a little bit of research and then talking to us also is good, James, or, getting to know people in your circle that are already probably doing the work and maybe you don't even know, and then starting a conversation.
Yeah, and I was gonna add, I think too, like in an artistic sense, just reading and listening and watching more work by like BIPOC. I think, because something I've been thinking about a lot too is when I was younger, I remember I brought in The Wiz for like these kids to watch. And the moment everybody watched it, they were just, and most of the kids that I was with, they were white. And so the first thing that came out of their mouth was, Dorothy isn't Black. Dorothy isn't Black. And so it was so like, they couldn't even grasp the concept that like Dorothy is this Black woman. And it makes me think like a lot of, Black or Indigenous or Latinx or queer, like we grow up watching these stories of other people, and that's all we have. So that's all we empathize with. But there is like the people who are our allies, it's like, if you didn't grow up with that, actually go watch like our stories, because I had to grow up my whole life empathizing with the other that wasn't me, and you did not. And that's not a diss or anything, but it's like, I think that's where a lot of problems come from. If all the representation on TV is like Black people in the hood and, like these really degrading, versions of us, and that's all they see, then that's all people in the middle of nowhere in Nebraska, they're gonna know, so I think seeking out those stories, and yeah, definitely, like Rosa said, ask. Like, I know when my ally friends come to me, I'm very much, but I also know Black people who are like, don't ask me, go do the work. Like, I don't have time for it. So, know the people who you can ask to get those things, but also just do your own research too.
Yeah, awesome. I'd like to add a little bit something. When I put together the workshops, I intentionally bring in people to speak and to share their experiences, like able-bodied, like there are people in the disability justice area, right? That, you know, you need to learn how they think, how they live and move in through the spaces and through the world, right? You can't just write a story, you know, depicting a person who's disabled when you don't know anything about how they live and how they work, right? So when we do these workshops, we make sure that, okay, here's a mental health professional to talk about their work experience, and then people who are living through bipolar, manic depression, stuff like that. They came in and talked, and they wrote a piece, a very moving piece, and an incredible writer that we've been working with for years, like Maya Villa, who wrote about their experience as a queer person of color, who's and also experienced, and they're very open. They haven't said it, so they shared that they are, you know, bipolar, and their experience going through a manic episode in a play. You know, like that was so powerful. We took that play and took it to the Los Angeles DMH, the Department of Mental Health conference. We did a quick reading of it with the actors, with mental health professionals, and then they just were just floored, right? They were like, this is exactly what happens. This is what happens, and this is what I've seen in my family. This is what, you know, they were instantly connected to it. So I think it's really important, like Rosa and sorry, what Rosa and Dionna said, you know, you really need to get out there and talk and learn and do your work.
I also think maybe sometimes drawing the connections that wouldn't necessarily be obvious in the beginning, like right after the Tree of Life shooting in Pittsburgh, where the gunman actually called out Hayes as the reason why he came in and shot and killed 11 people in the temple. Hayes used to be the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, and it was the society, it's been around for 150 years, that first helped Jews escape oppression in Russia and then in Germany and get them anywhere. Now it's a worldwide organization whose purpose is to save the, you know, to welcome the refugee. And a friend came to me, she had just seen a reading of 8 Nights. She said, I feel like your play connects with this, and let's do a fundraiser. And it ended up being like a nationwide fundraiser called 8 Nights of 8 Nights. And it was 8 readings of the play in 8 different cities, followed by panel discussions where we brought in everyone from Holocaust survivors to refugees, gay refugees from Nigeria, to journalists and people who are I can't even speak today. people who are activists throughout, and depending on what city we were in at that point in time, to get those people. And we raised a lot of money, but more so, I think we just spread an awareness of what one can do to hopefully make the world a little better, so that we don't repeat what happened to one group onto another group, which is what's happening now with the refugees coming in the camps in Mexico and at the border. And so it's sometimes it's not the logical thing. It's almost the kind of oddly illogical thing that helps people draw the connections, because right now the Jews don't need saving and don't need to be refugees anymore, but we were, and we need to help the ones who are next. So, I feel like being an ally is also listening, but also just trying to put something out there that can help the next person, even if you don't do it right.
Thank you. That was very helpful. We really appreciate it. We're nearing the end of our time. So I just wanted to leave with one last question of, what advice would you give someone who is struggling to find their authentic voice?
Just when we did our workshop, something we spoke a lot about was the remix, and how do you take something and turn it into your own. And just going back, that I forgot to mention to the students was a book that I think is so amazing is Audrey and Kennedy's book, People That Led to My Plays. or I think it's the things that led to my plays or the people that led to my plays. And it's just this crazy, amazing book where she'll write like Snow White, and then she'll put the name Snow White, and she'll go into this whole story about when she was like in, class, and her teacher said this thing about Snow White, and then she watched Snow White, and she just kind of breaks down all of these things from her childhood to the moment she gets married, and how they all kind of just like show up in her work because they all are a part of her. And so something we talked about a lot during the class, that workshop we led, is just like, what are the things you love? Like, what are those songs that you love? What are the books you love? Like, how can you like riff on those things and actually turn it into your own, or use that as the inspiration? Because again, at the end of the day, yes, Gunshot had to deal with like, the Black experience in America and Black Lives Matter, but also I took a bunch of folk songs and just like wove them into it because I loved folk music, and that was the music I wanted to hear at the time. And I put that in the play. And one of the characters in the play, he says, they ask him, she says like, that song isn't about you, because he starts singing it. And he's like, well, like, it's my song because I'm singing it and I'm telling it as my story now. So yeah, it is my story. And, it's taking ownership of the things you love, I guess. That's what I would say. Take ownership of the things you love and turn it into your own work of art.
Thank you.
You said it perfectly.
I was just going to say one thing I learned later in my life that now I teach my students when I do teaching artistry work is don't wait for permission. And the person who told me that, many people have told me that in various forms, but the person who said it in that way was Josefina Lopez at Casa 0101 Theater. Because a lot of us were just like, this is good, because if it's not, I'm going to go back to doing the nursing gig and like doing that. Like, am I a good writer? Am I a good writer? So pushing all of those voices out of the way and just saying, I only need myself to give myself permission to do the thing I want to do, and then just do it. Because in the practice is when you also find what your values are and what you lean into and what you like, and then sharing that work with someone and say, read it, please tell me what you think. You'll find after a while, when you do multiple little pieces, poems, or whatever, what have you, essays, sometimes the feedback will be similar, and it'll be like, oh, I love how you write about family. I love how you write about magical realism. And then you'll see, pockets of your artistry there. You're like, oh, these are things that I honor. So just paying attention to the things that are popping out for you. And also when you're talking to someone about yourself as an artist or as a human being, see what lights up, in their eyes, because of that in Lakesh moment, which I learned from Teatro Campesino, like, you are my other me. So if they're talking about you and all of a sudden they spark up, you're like, oh, that's something that I've never noticed. And just write it down. You're like, oh, that was a spark I saw in my friend's eye when they mentioned this part about myself. And it's not necessarily to, they're the ones who tell me who I am, but it's more like, what is it about you that excites a person and potentially audience members? And if that doesn't matter to you, then you're on the right step too, because that shouldn't. You can also push past that and be like, I'm just going to do it. And I'm not going to be everybody's cup of tea. And that's okay too.
I'd like to throw in just be you. Like, just write what you like. Just keep writing. I need to take my own advice. I listen to other people's stories and I produce people's stories. And I always encourage them, just keep writing, keep telling your stories, and document them however you can, in a poem, in a memory, and anything that you want, that you think. And then if you need to do the research for it, start, putting your research together and learn, and just keep learning and writing. And that's all the advice I would give.
I do think there's just this thing about keep going. Because I think what happens is we don't get very far, we feel stuck, and we stop. And I think all of us here know that, you got to dig before you hit that gold, like before you hit the vein, as they say. So I have a friend who, I love this, she's a novelist, and every day she sits down and she writes bad pages at the top of what she's about to write. And she writes 3 bad pages. And at the end of 100 days, she has 300 bad pages. And then she finds what's in the pages that are good, because you don't just find yourself on the surface, you find yourself underneath. So
Thank you. Thank you all so much for sharing your stories and your knowledge with us. It has been an absolute privilege to have you with us today and during the week. And we are all much better for having you step into our lives, even for a brief moment. So thank you. Next month, we'll be discussing the next generation of theater, and we will be seeing some artists in the industry that are doing the work to reflect a better picture of what we want theater to be. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you so much for bearing with us through all the technical difficulties today. So enjoy your weekend. Thank you all so much.